So just let me start with a quick reminder about parables, simple stories about God and about God's kingdom or the kingdom of heaven. We know that parables are teaching methods that Jesus used quite often, and in fact, Jesus became the master of telling parables. They are concrete pictures more than abstract ideas. They come from everyday life, and they are often appealing and entertaining. And there are about 40 or so parables in the New Testament, and each one is unique and teach us something slightly different. Now, for our parable this morning, what we discover is that in eating and drinking together, it provides the context for serious conversation. Think about around the table, eating and drinking, and the conversation that occurs. And to have Jesus at that table, Luke, the author, presents him as a philosopher, as a teacher, and as a prophet. He's eating with the chief Pharisee, and the meal takes place on the Sabbath. So in this little parable, Jesus offers a bit of sage advice. In verse 7 through 11, they really have no religious significance whatsoever, just insights and wisdom. The invitees are friends, brothers, relatives, rich neighbors. The poor, we know, would not have the money to respond. The crippled, lame, and the blind would not have the power or the capability. So these are things we just need to kind of hold closely, put out in front of us as we listen for meaning and a better understanding of the message that Jesus is teaching about kingdom living. And a couple other quick little observations. This is a parable of reversal. And a parable of reversal is a kind of parable that invites the listeners to look at and then question one's accepted way of acting. It invites us to look at our default responses. And also, Jesus doesn't address the appropriate way to get exalted. Rather, Jesus identifies the frame of mind that seeks exaltation in any fashion. Now, biblically, we know that the word exalt means high. We went up. We were way high up in the sanctuary, high above or a high position or rank. It carries the sense of being very important, very valuable. Also, in the negative, the word exalt means proud or arrogant. Now, the word humble comes from the word group, which means surprisingly low in height. I should have made him crawl around on the ground. Low in height or status. And the negative is it carries a meaning to humiliate or to put to shame. So verse 11 reminds us that for all those who exalt themselves will be humbled or put to shame, and those who humble themselves will be exalted or highly valued. So I found it really interesting that humility was regarded by the Hellenistic moralists as a vice, not as a virtue, but in Christianity, it is a distinctively value rather than vice. It's used 17 times or is in the word form in Scripture, and it is a way of, humility is a way of acting toward God and others. It's not merely an attitude. It takes its form as a character trait. It's visible. Humility is visible in how we live our lives. So, we read in Acts, serving the Lord with all humility and with tears, enduring the trials that came. Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility regard others as better than yourselves. And then in 1 Peter, and all of you must clothe yourself with humility in dealing with one another, for God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. So I started thinking a lot about being humble. And immediately, this is what I heard.
Oh Lord, it's hard to be humble when you're perfect in every way. I can't wait to look in the mirror, 'cause I get better looking each day. To know me is to love me. I must be a hell of a man. Oh Lord, it's hard to be humble, but I'm doing the best that I can. I used to have a girlfriend, but I guess she just couldn't compete with all these love-starved women who keep clamoring at my feet. I probably could find me another, but I guess they're all in awe of me. Well, who cares? I never get lonesome, 'cause I treasure my own company. Oh, everybody, come on. Oh, Lord, it's hard to be humble. Everybody, when you're perfect in every way. Can't wait to look in the mirror. I can't wait to look in the mirror. I get better looking. I get better looking each day. To know me is to what? To know me is to love me. Must be a hell of a man. I must be a hell of a man. Oh Lord, it's hard. Oh Lord, it's hard to be humble. We're doing the best that we can.
Yep, that's what I heard. The whole week, I heard Mac Davis sing that song, It's Hard to Be Humble, when you're perfect in every way. I related to that a lot. It's been written, though, that the value and trait of humility has gone by the wayside in our modern society. Boastfulness seems to have risen to the top of list of admired qualities, whether that's based on accomplishments or nothing at all. In fact, boastfulness appears to have acquired its own value, unwed from a hint of justifying elements that would at least on the surface warrant such a posturing. So humility is the opposite of arrogance and narcissism. And we know that narcissistic behavior, what it looks like, but interestingly, it's found more in men than women. Its cause is undetermined, but it's a combination probably of genetics and environmental factors. It's the symptoms that narcissists have is the excessive need for admiration, disregard for others' feelings, the inability to handle criticism, and the sense of entitlement. But we're not really talking about arrogance and narcissism. We're talking about the opposite. Jesus wants us to learn about humility. Jesus identifies being humbled as a trait of living a more Christ-like life. Are we off the screen? Oh. So I found a quiz somewhere, and I put it in your bulletin. It's in the insert, correct? We'll spend just a few minutes. You don't have to actually fill it out unless it really gets boring. But I want you to think about this. First part is name the 5 wealthiest people in the world. Name the last 3 Heisman Trophy winners. Name 10 people who have won the Nobel or Prize. Name the last 5 Academy Award winners for Best Actor or Actress. Name the last 5 World Series winners. All right? Now, if you're anything like me, you failed the first part of the quiz. I got a couple. Buffett, the guy from Microsoft, whatever his name is. I couldn't even remember who the World Series winner was last year. Boston? Is that what he said? All right, you got one. Good for you. But the quiz went on, and it had a second part to it. And it asks us to identify 3 teachers who made a difference in your learning, or 3 friends that helped you through a difficult time, or 5 people who have taught you something worthwhile. Name 3 people who made you feel appreciated and special, or 5 people that you enjoy spending time with. So hopefully the point of the quiz is obvious, and maybe the quiz in and of itself is a parable. Because it's not those who society has exalted, placed in some position of self-importance, or who have self-appointed themselves that we remember. We remember those who lived the kind of life worth living that we remember. We remember the people who made a difference in our lives. The humble people with humility, and that's connected with that kind of life. It's connected with the example of Jesus, to live with humility. And I would suggest that to live more Christ-like means that we embody humility. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "True humility is not thinking less of yourself, it is thinking of yourself less." Because this notion of humility that Jesus wants us to hear enhances relationships by helping us treat other people respectfully. It builds better relationship in all aspects of our daily lives. If we do not have to focus on being the center of attention, and we let someone else step into that role, that makes them better people and more supportive team members, friends, and family members. If we can let others. Humility, it lets us be open to learning more as well. Because if one doesn't have to value one's own opinion above everything else, humility lets us hear new things and different things. I read an article about the dean of business school in George Washington University. He got fired, and this is what he wrote. "I've taught leadership theory to executives and MBA students for more than a decade, but the painful reality is that I lacked one important element: humility. When I walked through the doors at George Washington University, I did not have any humility because I knew everything, when really I had much to learn. And in the end, what we teach about leadership, about being good people, simply does not prepare the students for leading because we ignore the importance of humility." Also discovered a research study by the University of Maine, and the researchers found that humility was the strongest linked personality trait with helpfulness. The study found that humility didn't just make people more helpful, but it helped people enjoy their relationships. It helped them become more grateful and generous, and it made them work better. So that question that I've been tarrying for this whole week is as a Christian, why does humility matter? Why does Christ teach us to be humble? Why would Christ want us to have humility in our lives? Part of the answer is that it forces us to realize that we don't have control. Humility lets us loosen our grip on the need to control things. And when you don't need to control things, you become a little less anxious. And in becoming a little less anxious, you become more receptive to the words and wisdom, to the love and care of others. Humility helps you listen to better. Think about it. Because if you know everything, you can't ever learn anything. And there's always lessons to learn from each other. Humility keeps us from being too judgmental toward others because, you know what? I have been wrong maybe a half a dozen times in my life. All right. I had my fingers crossed. I may not be correct. And others might have insights and wisdom. Humility lets me be open to them. Helps me to be more helpful toward them and bring a deeper enjoyment. Humility makes asking for forgiveness a little easier. It reminds us to be grateful. It equips us to act for all the right reasons. And humility brings the expectation of peacefulness into our lives. So the question, as a Christian, why does humility matter? Why does Christ teach us about humility? Because it helps us become more like Christ. And the world needs more of Christ in it. It's not that hard to be humble. You just have to choose to allow it become a part of who you are, because it is a part of whose we are.